We've got a guy like, this is a fucking problem, all right? Excuse my French. A year and a half on TRT, erectile issues, okay? Stop listening to Redditors. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this is the Thunder Channel on nootropics, on testosterone, and on male performance. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified of all future content. Please like the video. I've seen more likes lately, so I really appreciate that. It helps the algorithm, and that's what we need. If you want to support us, but also get access to powerful nootropic stacks and high-level nootropics and otherwise biohacking consulting, you can book me at livecortex.com or find both of our nootropic stacks, the Torque stack and the Cortex. Time-tested, market-proven, down in the description. All right, folks, so what I want to do is I want to address ED, erectile dysfunction, on TRT, but also discuss it somewhat in the context of not being on TRT in relation to estrogen. Now, a really unfortunate thing has happened over the last, call it 5 years, on the testosterone subreddit, among other places, which has pervaded, into the minds of many men. And that is the notion that you don't need to manage estrogen, or you really don't need to manage it all that much while you're on TRT. Or that you could take things like dindylmethane to, reduce E2, which is not true. DIM is not an AI. Cialis is not an AI. I've seen that paper. You got to read the paper a little further to understand exactly what it's doing. That's not an aromatase inhibitor. And, people like from the TRT and hormone optimization channel, the most outspoken guy who doesn't really do content anymore, named Danny Bossa, had actually convinced people. I mean, these guys actually convinced real men that they don't want to manage estrogen or reduce estrogen, which is predominantly a female hormone, when they're on TRT. The E2 is actually going to bind to your penis. I mean, you actually have receptors there, and that's going to inhibit erectile function to a certain capacity. And then there's all this theoretical stuff like how much saturation at the E2 receptors over a consistent period of time. What does that do at the vascular level? Because we know that E2 at certain levels at the binding to the receptors in the penis, the E2 receptors, causes venous leakage. There are plenty of papers on that, like this one, Increased Estradiol Levels in Venous Occlusive Disorder, a possible functional mechanism of venous leakage, where they go on to explain exactly what I'm saying here. If you really want to go further into literature, this is a good paper to read, Effects of Estradiol on Penile Erection, a cross-sectional study, wherein they conclude our data indicate that estradiol inhibits penile erection, particularly at the penile base, also when the effective erection time of the penile base lasts longer than 10 minutes, blah, blah, blah. Go read the whole study. Now, while I agree estradiol is cardioprotective, it helps your brain to function well. You need a degree of it for joint health, but you also need to be dosing fish oil and, doing other things like lifting heavy things to keep bone mineral density in a great place and to maintenance joint health. It's not just estradiol. These recommendations for not managing estrogen on TRT is the reason that a lot of guys are having ED and have to take Cialis. All right, so let's jump to the testosterone subreddit, to a post that is titled, "All my labs are normal, but my erections are inconsistent without Viagra or Cialis." So the guy goes through his bloods here. Looks like total T is sitting at 972. That is good, because that is post or above the therapeutic range, which is around 800 nanograms per deciliter. Free T's in an okay place. DHEA is fine. Without Viagra and Cialis, he doesn't have steady erections. Now, if I look at his estradiol ultra sensitive, it's 28.5 picograms per milliliter. Now, the upper end of the reference range on estradiol ultra sensitive is, I think it's 29 or 30 picograms per milliliter, right? So he's pushing the top of the reference range there. He's like right below the top of the reference range, where, essentially the reference range is in check for many reasons, but he's a couple picograms per milliliter from going over the reference range on E2. So in this particular case, yes, this guy's probably going to want to get his estradiol sensitive down, not significantly far, but probably to between 18 and 25 picograms per milliliter. I'd actually push a little more aggressively to get it between 18 and 20. Now, that's a difficult number to reach, which is why dialing in AI needs to be approached very, very strategically, with the labs done post, 24 hours post dosing it, as well as 3 days post-dosing it, so you can know exactly the point at which the anastrozole stops binding to the heme iron of the aromatase enzyme and releases it back into circulation, where it can then convert testosterone to estrogen. You got to know all this stuff. But anyway, I can almost guarantee you, so long as nothing else is wrong with this dude's physiology, which there probably isn't, that if you got the estradiol sensitive down to between 18 and 21, 22, just right around that range, picograms per milliliter, and stayed there consistently, because we don't really know how long the E2 receptors have been saturated with estrogen, estrogen and how that's affected, venous leakage and kind of venous occlusion, the vascular function of the penis. So it may take time to actually rehab from that. Then you got good anecdotals like this. Libido and erections. What total T and E2 levels give you the best sexual function? In which a user goes, here's my anecdotal info. November 22nd, I was taking 150 milligrams testosterone a week, total T at 950, E2 at 23, and libido was good. February 23rd, I had increased to 200 milligrams a week of T. Total T went to 1,300 nanograms per deciliter, E2 at 62, and low libido. Started taking anastrozole 0.25 every 3 days, and libido is increasing. Now, here's a classic example. I mean, this same template can be replicated many, many times in the testosterone subreddit. It's guys that go on TRT. They usually start with a high dose. They're told not to manage estrogen because there are actually clinics, believe it or not, that are operating from this sort of pseudoscientific, hardly scientific, easily refutable notion that you don't need to manage estrogen or E2 on testosterone. And so what usually happens is, obviously with the 150 plus milligrams, roughly of testosterone a week, E2 rises past a certain threshold. It starts fussing with the vasculature of the penis, and people get, erectile difficulties on TRT, which again is insane. But again, if you're operating under this notion that, E2 doesn't need to be managed, and you haven't read all the papers on the vasculature of the penis in relation to E2 receptor binding, you'd be puzzled and be posting on Reddit. This guy goes, libido and erection quality decreased at 8 to 9 weeks in of TRT, right? This is a huge hint. He goes, about 8 weeks in now and feel pretty flat. I've been doing 100 milligrams of test sips split across 2 pins, so 200 milligrams a week for about 8 to 9 weeks now. Everything has been great up until a week ago. Now, this is also part of this very, very common template. You start TRT, you get pretty powerful erections, good libido, you're feeling fucking great, you're going to the gym, you're gaining muscle mass, you're losing fat, erections are good, libido is good, and then it starts to decline. Now, some people liken this to or try to attribute it or ascribe it to the fact that your endogenous production shuts down, but I'd wager that has very little to do with it. I mean, you're supplying the exogenous T via injections. He goes, after 4 weeks, total T was up to the 800s, E2 of 38. I was getting daily morning wood and energy levels were way up, libido up too, been putting on muscle, blah, blah, blah. Since maybe last week, I've noticed that my mood and energy levels have been pretty flat, feeling quite blah. Wife says I'm more irritable. I've also noticed that my penis doesn't feel meaty like it did. It sort of generally feels insensitive. My libido is way down, and morning woods are far less frequent. For a while, when I woke up every time I was hard, like I had morning wood every day. That's what you're supposed to have on TRT, and if you have adequate levels and a good ratio of test to estrogen. I can still get it up and maintain erection, but need more direct stimulation. Another fucking huge red flag, dude. I'm not able to get bloods for a few weeks, and this pretty much sucks considering one of the reasons I went on was sexual function. Could this be high E2? I have no other symptoms, or should I try running HCG? So probably guys in the comment section would be like, yeah, run HCG, don't take an ion. This is, I'm trying to find a diplomatic way to say this. That is misguided information, right? Misguided perspectives. You'd have to actually work with men in a consulting capacity or be a doctor that's prescribing TRT in a clinic to see large scale men and their reaction to these things, as well as understand the literature to know that probably this guy's got to get his E2 down. Now, look, he was historically at 38 and felt fine, right? So erections were fine. It's probably when he crossed over that threshold of 40, 45 picograms per milliliter that the problem started to come about. But this does not mean that 38 picograms per milliliter estradiol sensitive is like a target. It's that, what people don't understand about testosterone replacement therapy and hormones is that there's saturation points at the receptor sites, right? If you're sitting at 38, but you only recently got to 38, you may have another 2 weeks of E2 sitting there, or it may be slowly rising where you still have erection function. But once you reach a saturation point of E2 receptor binding, at the penile tissue, then it's like you could be at 41 and have ED, whereas at 38 you didn't. Only a few picograms per milliliter difference, right? Like, what the hell is that? Like, sometimes guys are sensitive to that very minor change, but also I would argue, based on the cellular dynamics of all this stuff, that he's got, he reached a tipping point of E2 binding at the penile tissue and do some venous leakage or vascular changes, and therefore, libido went down, and so did EQ. This one, which is really, really sad, and this is an example of taking the pro-estrogen group's advice that you don't need to manage estrogen so far far that you're willing to be on fucking TRT for a year and a half and still be struggling with erections. This is the problem. This is why I did that video about the estrogen hoax, where these guys with their hardly scientific, unscientific, frankly, and omitting very important papers, as I described before, like, you know, the effect of estradiol on penile erection and the papers on estradiol and venous leakage. We've got a guy like, this is a fucking problem, all right? Excuse my French. A year and a half on TRT, erectile issues, okay? Stop listening to Redditors. So this guy's protocol is 160 milligrams a week, split up into 2 doses. I think that's fine. A click of cream every morning, so he's running testosterone cream as well. He goes, on TRT, libido was hit or miss until I added the cream along with daily Cialis, but I still struggle to get fully erect. Now you've got TRT and cream, and you have Cialis, and you then can't, you know, stay erect. Again, this is a huge issue. He goes, I've seen my E2 all over the place. Now let's look at labs here. So here are the blood work that I've done on TRT. First dose, 125 milligrams a week, total T 669, E2 27, prolactin very high, 26. Okay, so the prolactin needs to go down. Again, that's under E2 control largely and dopaminergic control. So in that particular case, the E2, I don't know if this is sensitive or not, would probably need to go down between 15 and 20 picograms per milliliter. Second dose, 160 milligrams a week, total T 882. E233, prolactin back within range, low libido and ED. Now, this is a great example, right? You got, you know, T above the therapeutic range of 800 nanograms per deciliter, E2 at 33. Prolactin is low, so you can't say that this is prolactin in this particular case. It's the E2, okay? It needs to be lower to between 15 and 25 picograms per milliliter and stay there. Remember, you know, there's this, again, somewhat speculation, but looking at the literature, this seems very plausible that you've got this consistent E2 receptor binding in the penis, and over a considerable period of estrogen saturation in those receptors, that's going to mess with venous function and cause ED. Third dose, 180 milligrams a week. Total T went up to 977. E2 didn't bump up too much. It went to 35. Low libido and ED. What do you know? Fourth dose, 250 a week. 1338 total test. E2 of 70, prolactin 13. So this is not a prolactogenic issue at the moment. It was high before, and that was probably estradiol induced. But right now, the E2 is at, you know, on this fourth dose, 70. Last dose, fifth dose, 200 milligrams per week, plus an AI. Now, this is here is an example of taking, you know, anastrozole too far. 200 milligrams a week plus AI, total T 1180, E2 less than 10 or greater than 10. I think he means less than 10 here. Prolactin is 8, kind of low libido. So libido increased a little bit, it looks like, still ED. Last protocol, switching his protocols a lot, 160 milligram injections plus 1 click of test cream on scrotum. 5 milligrams Cialis daily, libido high, ED better, but still not normal. All right. So what is happening here is this last dose, 200 milligrams a week, E2 around 10, probably a little too low. Again, the sweet spot range is between 15 and 25. And for a lot of guys, it's going to be 15 to 20 picograms per milliliter. Here's the confusing thing. You know, once this guy gets his E2 in that 15 to 20, call it picograms per milliliter range in the ultrasensitive, you got to stay there, okay? Don't keep changing the protocol. You know, find the AI dose that keeps you right in that range with your T, you know, hopefully being above 800, and stay there, because you again, you need to sort of recover and rehab the vasculature of the penis from this consistent E2 binding. Like, again, you know, he goes from, you know, 28 or something and 30, and one of them was like, what was it, 52 E2, down to right around 10 picograms per milliliter. These fluctuations are going to cause problems in erectile function as well. You need some estrogen for libido and erections, but again, it can't be too high, can't be too low. You got to get it in that sweet spot of 15 to 20, you know, 25 picograms per milliliter and let it stay there. That would resolve this guy's ED in time, no question. I think this is also a great anecdotal just to kind of highlight the other side. Guy goes, why do I get amazing erections when I take my AI? Morning, noon, anytime I want. If I don't take it for a week and a half, they stop. Yes, E2, my TRT dose is only 30 milligrams every other day, and my estrogen isn't even out of range. Do I even need TRT? Should I just take the AI? Seems like it's helping. No, it's your T and the AI. See, this is a great example which completely refutes this notion that you don't need to manage estradiol on TRT, and that if you lower your dose and go in these more frequent injections, that's somehow going to manage E2. Again, misconception. If you are constantly exposed to what is a bad E2 level for you, and that could be 29 picograms per milliliter, you have constant E2 receptor binding. That's going to, reduce your diamine oxide. That's a histamine degrading enzyme. You're going to end up with brain fog for a lot of people because of, not being able to reduce histamine. That's another issue that we won't even talk about here. But look, 30 milligrams every other day. That is a very low dose of testosterone per week. It's like 100 and something, 105. Yeah, 15 times 7. That's 105 milligrams of testosterone a week. That is a very low dose. And he's injecting frequently, obviously using an insulin pen doing this. But yet E2 is giving him problems, completely refuting this notion that you can just change your protocol. Look, may work for some people, but again, you're chronically exposed to the same level of E2. This whole notion of long esters like cypionate that you should be injecting every day, it may work for some people, but I mean, for some guys, it is, I don't even, this isn't my opinion, it's not going to work. People are talking about the ratio and all this sort of stuff here. And yeah, there is a general ratio, but that doesn't always apply to men either. What ultimately needs to happen is, look, this guy found an answer to the issue of erections when taking anastrozole to get the testosterone saturation at the androgen receptors, the DHT saturation, as well as not have what is referred to as the low T experience with constantly elevated or even somewhat high E2. Another important thing he says here is my estrogen isn't even out of range. Perfect example. Again, I have worked with guys in a consulting capacity where their E2 is at 27 picograms per milliliter. There seems to be a really interesting sweet spot between 15 and 25. Like guys go above that, some of them, and they have erection problems. When they go below that and give it time to stay at that range, then the erections come back. Perfect example of like low dose testosterone, right? Guys probably eating broccoli twice a day because these guys, think that's an AI or something, which it isn't. You're really minimizing the exposure of the phytoestrogens, xenoestrogens by eating broccoli and taking DIM, which is good for prostate health, for the record, on TRT. I mean, it's not going to lower your E2 and it's not going to prevent E2 receptor binding. Perfect case where E2 is not even out of range. See, like this is the bottom line, guys. Because people have taken this advice, there's going to be a lot of guys like this guy and other people who are in a worse situation because their EQ is really bad, that their E2 estradiol is in range, right? It's not too high, at least on the reference range. And they think that they don't need to manage it, or they're like, why aren't I getting, good erections, and why don't I have good libido on TRT? The answer is, for you, you're going to need to lower E2 even just a little bit. Your body keeps these things, in a very tight range via hypothalamic pituitary gonadal interaction and feedback regulatory mechanisms when you're not on TRT. But when you are, a lot of that goes, well, it obviously goes awry, right? Those feedback systems are not as functional, if at all, compared to when you're endogenously making testosterone. So you've got to keep it in the tight range. What he probably did here, he doesn't actually say like what dose of the AI and at what frequencies. He probably threw down like 0.25 or 0.5 milligrams of anastrozole in this case, and it took his E2 from what is likely 29-30 down to between, 17 and 22 picograms per milliliter, which again is right in that sweet spot for guys where you're still, by the way, pro-estrogen guys, getting all the estrogen receptor binding in cardiac tissue and brain tissue that you need, as well as facilitating joint health. But by the way, estrogen is not the only thing that fosters joint health. When you take an AI and have joint problems, you're probably not taking fish oil. Look at the menopausal women in like the menopause or premenopause subreddit, and they're going to complain of dry mouth, achy bones, and all this stuff of low E2, and then they start taking fish oil, and those issues resolve largely. Again, it's not just estradiol. It's a little more complex than that. That's why Reddit is good for anecdotals, but at the same time, it's filled with misguided information. Yeah, especially initially, if you are not used to quick reductions in E2, your joints may hurt for a day or two, especially if you're not dosing fish oil, if you're not conscious of like joint health otherwise. But that usually resolves. Like you have to find, again, that perfect place of estradiol in picograms per milliliter, hopefully on the sensitive assay, where you feel good, you have good erections, you have libido, but you don't have joint pain or any other issues. All right, this is the bottom line, right? If you want to go look at the literature, I would suggest that you do on venous leakage, NE2. Again, some of the papers that I brought up in the beginning of this video, please go have a look at that literature so that you fully understand. But do a little deep dive into the vasculature of the penis and the E2 receptors and how E2 affects it. And understand that very rarely is this loud vocal minority on the internet right. The keto guys were wrong that, carbs are going to kill you and you shouldn't eat carbs. If you are on TRT and you have ED, you have to understand that estradiol is probably the driver of that ED if it isn't prolactin. And if you're getting high prolactin numbers, again, that is more than likely the E2 fussing with D2 receptors and binding in the lactotropes, the pituitary. The lactotropes are secreting extra PRL, and then you're having erection issues too, because, prolactin will inhibit erections at the penile base as well. I can do a separate video on dosing, anastrozole or even aromacin. I'm not against that either. I just think, again, both need to be approached very, very carefully. Just to give you an example, my protocol at the moment is 180 milligrams. 182 milligrams a week. I'm dosing every other day intramuscularly. I'm not doing sub-Q at this point. And on the day of injection, I require about 0.25 milligrams of anastrozole on the day of injection. Don't need any AZ the next day, just 0.25. So what does that come out to a week? I don't know, it's somewhere around a milligram or whatever a week. But guess what happens if I don't take the AZ? And by the way, I've fussed with 140 milligrams. I think I've gone as low as 135 milligrams, not really getting the benefits of TRT all that much. Yeah, estradiol was lower, but still it was sort of at a constant threshold because I was dosing frequently and, had erectile issues then. Again, once my E2, so on that protocol, when my E2 gets past at this stage, right around 25 or so, and it starts creeping up, 28, 29, 30, because again, it's going to fluctuate. In some cases, every few hours, it may be a different digit on the reference range. Then softer erections, libido's a little worse, right? Morning wood is either not there at all past a certain range, or it's just not, prominently strong. During sex, I need more stimulation in order to maintain solid, good erections. If the E2 is managed appropriately in a way which still gives me brain and cardiac tissue E2, but it's not over this range for me personally, which is going to be different for different guys, erections are great. Honestly, I feel like I'm a teenager again. Use this how you will. If you're one of those guys on the pro-estrogen camps, I know you're probably gonna be angry at everything that I just said, and that's fine. Dislike the video or comment or whatever. I'm not here to censor your free speech. But I would urge you to recognize that, both Rand McClain as well as myself and many other people who see real people and actually get to look at labs all of the time. I'm looking at labs while you're playing fucking Warzone, bro. It's just what, I do. It's you got to understand that those people have a lot more information, and these new sort of trendy things that, gain popularity on the internet and get sort of spread out in this massive echo chamber typically don't apply to real-time, real-life scenarios, all right? If you're on TRT and you have ED, that is a problem. If you're listening to pro-estrogen groups, get your E2 down. If you got joint pain from Arimidex, or it's not from Arimidex, it's from dropping estrogen too quickly, you're sensitive to it, you will get used to it, but you should be dosing high-dose fish oil. You should be lifting heavy things. You should maybe look at taking strontium to kind of bulletproof your bone mineral density. I hope this has been useful. Thanks so much for watching. We'll do much more content on this coming soon. But again, if you're a guy on TRT that's having ED issues, a lot of these guys, it's masked because they're taking Cialis. You don't usually need to be taking Cialis. It's good for you, and by every account, it's largely good for people and will help blood flow. And some people may even need penile rehab with Cialis. Got it. But largely, if you manage E2 and find the right number for you, which is going to take a lot of experimentation, you can't be lazy with this shit and it's just, a run and gun, I got my protocol and it's just set it and forget it. That's just not how it works. Once you're dialed in, it does, but that may take some time to reach that. Get your E2 in the perfect range, experiment, run labs frequently. You're going to spend some money on discounted labs. You're going to make frequent trips to Quest, but it is all worth it. You got on TRT, right? This is a big endeavor, right? To age less, right? To take yourself back in terms of testosterone 20 years in some cases, if you're 40. This is all a good thing, but it comes with personal responsibility to not be lazy and to dial in numbers accordingly, all right? If you need to hire me, you can go to the menu and go to consultations at livecortex.com. and it'll pop up my page where I've got reviews of guys that I've worked with. I mean, I wish I could put every review up there, but it's just like you don't have room for all the reviews. I'll get you guidance on a host of things, especially related to TRT. Like if your protocol needs adjustment and you need to know some of these distinctions from people who have seen blood work and look at it all the time and can manage guys on TRT, hire me. It's one of the major things that I do. For the nootropics guys or people that aren't into nootropics but would like to understand how to perform better functionally from a cognitive perspective, look, we got two stacks. One is the Cortex stack, exceptionally powerful, market tested, time proven, and the Torque stack. I mean, Torque is just like consistent brain energy. It's very, very powerful. Like if I don't have Torque next to my desk, like literally I start freaking out. Wait, yeah, go get a clean stimulant in Torque, livecortex.com. You're going to be very happy with the purchase. I can almost guarantee you. Pleasure being with you guys. Look, if you appreciate anything I said, please like the video, comment, subscribe. I'd really love if you guys would, just say something for the algorithm in the comment section. The full podcast with Vigorous Steve coming soon. So look forward to that. It's going to be epic, looking like Friday or Saturday. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you, and I will talk to you on the next one.